In this video, we're going to show you how to replace your driver's side front CV axle on your Ford Explorer. It's located right behind your front wheel. The process for this is the same as the passenger side. I'm going to go ahead and use our pry tool and pop off our center cap here. Using our 19mm socket, we're going to loosen and remove the lug nuts. Here, remove the wheel and set it aside. We're going to remove our cotter pin out of our lower ball joint here. What we're trying to do is move the little tabs on the cotter pin into position so we can go ahead and pull this out. Take some cutters. We want to grab the front side here. Try and work this out. Use our pick here to try and get inside the loop and work that cotter pin out like so. Let's see if we can pinch and pull this out. Using our 22mm socket, we're going to go ahead and remove this nut. Now that we have the nut off, I'm going to use a hammer and I'm going to strike the front side of the knuckle while applying upward pressure to release this. We're going to use our 16mm deep socket on the bolt side and 16mm wrench on the top. Your original component might be slightly different. Got to remove that. Got to remove the sleeve, the washers, and the bushings. Now underneath our lower control arm, we do have a jack supporting the suspension at this point here. It is a torsion bar, so we want to make sure that we take that preload off of that supporting this here. All right, we're going to go ahead and use our 32mm socket and remove our axle nut. I'm going to go ahead and spin one of our lug nuts on here. This is going to hold the rotor to the hub when we remove the caliper and bracket. Using our 15mm socket, we're going to remove these two bolts. Before we remove the caliper and the bracket, you want to have a support tool, hanging tool, or strap to support the caliper up and out of the way so we're not adding pressure on the hose here. Remove the caliper, bracket, and the pads. Using a 15mm socket on the nut and a 60mm wrench on the bolt side, let's go ahead and remove this nut. Using a 5/16 socket, we're going to go ahead and remove the screw with a small bolt holding our ABS wire to the knuckle. Once we get that bolt out, I'm going to go ahead and let that wire pull off to the side, and we're just going to reinstall that bolt here just so we have that in place for reinstallation. You can use our trim tool. I'm going to pop the retainers for our ABS wire. We'll go ahead and push our pin through here, or our bolt. Allow the upper control arm to come up. And while we're pulling this away, we can go ahead and push our axle through the back side of the hub. All right, now that we have the axle out of the knuckle, we want to go ahead and pop that out of the front diff right there. Now right between our axle and our diff here, we're going to go ahead and put our pry bar. I'm going to gently work this out. You see the axle coming out of the diff. Now we have a catch can underneath to catch any differential fluid that might leak out when we pull that axle out. Now with the axle out, you want to go ahead and inspect this rubber seal right here. We're going to give it a wipe down. You want to inspect to see if there's any tears, any burrs, anything like that. If you're going to replace the seal, now is the time to do it. Ours is in good, reusable condition, so we're just going to wipe that down. Let's go ahead and install our spline shaft into our diff. Do is go ahead and line up those splines here and then pop this in. See if this will pop in. And there we go. Now our axle is seated in there. I felt the splines lock in, so I just used a dead blow hammer. You could use a rubber mallet. Strike the end of the axle and it'll pop it right into place. You'll know that it's fully seated because the axle itself will be right up against that seal on the differential. Once you have that seated, we can now position the axle to come through the wheel hub on the knuckle. Before installing the axle, we're going to apply some grease to these splines. Not a ton, just enough to help that slide into place and keep those splines lubricated. Let's go ahead and position this and get this installed. Okay, now that we have that lined up, work this up into place, work that axle so it comes through the front here. Now that you have the splines coming through the front of the hub here, let's focus up top to the upper pinch bolt ball joint. Once you have that control arm into place, install our bolt through the pinch bolt area. Want to install our nut for that pinch bolt. I'm gonna go ahead and snug that down. Let's go ahead and grab your caliper and bracket and align this up. Slide this into place. I'm gonna go ahead and install your bolts here. So once you get that bolt in the upper hole, we can go ahead line that up and adjust this here. I'll go ahead and just snug those in. Install the axle nut. Using a 32mm socket, let's go ahead and snug that down. Go ahead and remove that lug nut. Set that aside. So we're going to install our ABS wire, pressing our clips into the chassis here. Go ahead and install our little bolt on the back side here. Once you get that bolt started, go ahead and snug that down. Now you're just holding a plastic clip here, so once that bolt is in there and it bottoms out, just give it a little bit more just to secure it in place. I'm going to install our sway bar end link. Put the bolt in, washer cup up, feed this up in. I'm going to go ahead and install our next bushing with the little protruding O-ring down, washer cup facing down. Drop the sleeve on there. And put a washer cup facing up. And install our next rubber bushing with the protruding O-ring facing up. I'm going to go ahead and try and push that over and into place. What we're going to do is put a little bit of leverage between our axle here and our sway bar link. It's going to allow for us to go ahead and get this bushing into place a little bit easier. Going to install our upper bushing, our upper washer with the cone facing down, and the nut. Go ahead and snug this down. Gonna loosen that just a tiny bit. Good rule of thumb is when you're tightening this down here, you just want the rubber to swell just beyond or just to the diameter of the washer itself. We're good with that. Go ahead and position your knuckle to the point where we can go ahead and install our tie rod end. On our tie rod end, we have our hole here for the cotter pin to go into. Take into consideration the position of where that's going to go into and where you're going to have room to put that cotter pin in. So we're going to use our pick and we're going to turn this just a little bit. Install our castle nut. Torque our castle nut to 65 foot-pounds. I want to pay attention to the port here for the cotter pin. I want to make sure we can see through this. There should be a notch in the cotter pin or in the castle nut for our cotter pin to go through. Now, if you can't get the cotter pin into the ball joint here because the nut is not lined up enough with that notch, you simply want to tighten it to the point where there is your first availability of that notch there. Never want to loosen this nut after it's been torqued. I'm going to feed this through. I'm going to put it through the other way so you can see it coming through here. I'm going to take my cutters here, grab the long tab, bend that down, tap it up, snip off the excess, and snip off the excess here. Torque our pinch bolt here to 35 foot-pounds. Good. Torque our caliper bracket bolts to 60 foot-pounds. We'll go ahead and position our pry bar like so. I'm going to go ahead and torque down our axle nut to 175 foot-pounds. After finishing this installation, it's important to have an alignment done on your vehicle. Install your wheel. I'm going to install our lug nuts. Once we have all these on, we're going to go ahead and snug those down.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.